When a secret romance blossoms between his son and the maid's daughter, the millionaire's reaction defies all expectations. The unfolding drama challenges societal norms and familial bonds in surprising ways. And if you cherish your family and love stories like this, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and avoid 10 years of bad luck. The afternoon sun filtered through the glass panels of the Beverly Hills Art Gallery, where local artists displayed their work during the annual community showcase. Tyler Anderson wandered through the exhibits, his hands tucked into the pockets of his designer jeans, more out of obligation to his father's social circle than genuine interest. That changed when he rounded the corner into the emerging artist section. Jenna Martinez stood beside her canvas, her dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, explaining her technique to an elderly couple. Her painting depicted a striking contrast between Beverly Hills mansions and the working-class neighborhoods beyond, connected by intertwining golden threads. Tyler found himself drawn to both the artwork and its creator. The threads represent our shared humanity, Jenna explained to the couple, her voice carrying confidence despite her simple attire that marked her as an outsider in this wealthy enclave. We're all connected, regardless of where we live or what we own. The elderly couple moved on, and Tyler stepped forward. That's a bold statement to make in Beverly Hills, he said, offering a genuine smile. I'm Tyler. I know who you are, Jenna replied, meeting his gaze directly. Your father employs my mother, Rosa. She's been the Anderson household manager for 15 years. Recognition flickered across Tyler's face. He'd seen Jenna occasionally around the house, but had never really noticed her before. Now, watching her discuss her art with passion and intelligence, he couldn't understand how he'd missed her. They spent the next hour discussing her paintings, sharing stories, and laughing about the pretentious art critics who took themselves too seriously. Tyler found himself captivated by her unpretentious nature and sharp wit, so different from the calculated conversations he usually endured at social events. Later that evening, in his bedroom at the Anderson mansion, Tyler sat at his desk, attempting to capture Jenna's likeness in his sketchbook. He wasn't nearly as talented as she was, but he felt compelled to try. Charles Anderson passed by the open door, pausing briefly to observe his son's unusual concentration. New project? Charles asked, noting Tyler's intense focus. Just sketching, Tyler responded vaguely, not ready to share his growing feelings for Jenna. Charles lingered a moment longer, sensing something different about his son, but unable to pinpoint what had changed. He continued down the hallway, his footsteps echoing against the marble floors. In the servants' quarters, Rosa Martinez sat with Jenna in their modest but comfortable apartment attached to the main house. They shared a simple dinner of homemade enchiladas, a stark contrast to the gourmet meals Rosa prepared for the Andersons. Your paintings were beautiful today, mi amor, Rosa said, pride evident in her voice. But I saw you talking with Tyler Anderson. Jenna pushed her food around her plate. We were just discussing art, Mama. Jenna, listen to me. Rosa set down her fork, her expression serious. I've worked for the Andersons since you were a child. They're good people, but they live in a different world. A world where people like us serve, not socialize. That's not fair, Jenna protested. My art was good enough to be in that gallery. Why shouldn't I be able to talk to whoever I want? Because life isn't fair, mi hija. Your talent is undeniable, but talent alone doesn't erase social barriers. I've seen too many dreams crushed by these differences. Jenna stood up, clearing her plate with more force than necessary. Maybe it's time for things to change. Maybe someone needs to challenge these invisible barriers. Rosa watched her daughter with a mixture of pride and fear. She recognized the determination in Jenna's eyes, the same determination she'd had at that age. But she also knew the pain that came with hoping for too much in a world that wasn't ready to change. As night settled over Beverly Hills, 3 people lay awake in the same house. Tyler sketching until his hand cramped, Jenna planning her next painting with renewed purpose, and Rosa praying that her daughter's heart wouldn't be broken by dreams too big for their reality. The seeds of change had been planted during that art showcase, though none of them yet realized how their lives would intertwine and transform in the months to come. The barriers between their worlds, seemingly solid and unchangeable, had already begun to crack. The Anderson Mansion's pool area buzzed with activity during Tyler's impromptu weekend gathering. Designer swimwear and expensive sunglasses dominated the scene as his wealthy friends lounged on custom furniture. Tyler stood at the outdoor bar, his hand resting on the small of Jenna's back as he made introductions. "Everyone, this is Jenna Martinez. She's an incredible artist. Her work was featured at the Beverly Hills Showcase last month," Tyler announced, his voice carrying across the pool deck. The response was immediate but subtle. Madison Crawford, whose father owned half of Los Angeles' luxury hotels, lowered her sunglasses and gave Jenna a slow once-over. "Martinez? Any relation to the housekeeper?" "Rosa Martinez is my mother," Jenna replied firmly, refusing to show discomfort. She wore a simple sundress from a department store, standing out among the designer labels surrounding her. "How quaint," Madison responded, exchanging glances with others around the pool. Blake Thompson, Tyler's closest friend since prep school, approached them. "Hey Ty, can I grab you for a sec? Need to discuss the upcoming charity gala." Tyler hesitated, looking at Jenna. She nodded, forcing a smile. "Go ahead, I'll get myself a drink." As soon as Tyler stepped away, the whispers began. Jenna could hear fragments as she walked to the bar. "Can you believe he brought the help's daughter? Probably trying to get her art noticed. Wonder what Charles would say." At the other end of the pool, Blake confronted Tyler. "What are you doing, man? Your father's on the hospital board with my dad. You can't just bring the maid's daughter to these things." "She's talented and intelligent," Tyler defended. "And I like her. Since when do you care about someone's background?" "Since reality exists," Blake retorted. "Look, I get it, she's different, exotic maybe. But this isn't some romantic movie where love conquers all. There are expectations, responsibilities." Meanwhile, in the kitchen, Rosa overheard two other housekeepers discussing the scene unfolding by the pool. Maria, who worked for the Thompsons, spoke in hushed Spanish. "Did you hear? Rosa's daughter is out there with the young Mr. Anderson. Everyone's talking about it in the staff quarters across the neighborhood." Rosa gripped the counter, her knuckles white. She'd spent years building a reputation as a reliable, professional housekeeper. Now, her daughter's presence at a party meant for employers threatened to complicate everything. The situation worsened when Charles's friend, Richard Crawford, Madison's father, stopped by unexpectedly. He observed the pool scene through the glass doors before finding Charles in his study. "Charles, we need to talk about Tyler," Richard began, settling into a leather armchair. "I just saw him getting cozy with your housekeeper's daughter." Charles looked up from his laptop. "They're probably just being friendly. Tyler's always been kind to the staff." "This looks like more than kindness," Richard warned. "Listen, I remember when we were young, we all had our rebellious phases. But there's a difference between rebellion and potentially damaging your family's position in society." "What exactly are you suggesting?" Charles asked, his tone sharpening. "The hospital board position you're up for? The country club membership committee? These things matter, Charles. And people talk. They're already talking about Tyler displaying questionable judgment." Back at the pool, Jenna had found a quiet corner, pretending to text on her phone. She watched Tyler arguing with Blake, saw the way others whispered behind their hands. Every laugh felt directed at her, every glance a judgment. Tyler finally broke away from Blake and returned to her side. "I'm sorry about all this. They don't know you yet. They don't want to know me," Jenna replied quietly. "This was a mistake. I should go." "No, stay. Please. We can show them they're wrong." But as Jenna looked around at the hostile faces and whispered conversations, she realized this afternoon had changed everything. What had been a private connection between her and Tyler was now public, subject to scrutiny and judgment from both their worlds. The news spread quickly through both social circles, the wealthy families of Beverly Hills and the working-class staff who served them. By sunset, Rosa had received 3 calls from other housekeepers, all expressing concern about the situation. The barriers between their worlds, briefly forgotten in the warmth of new love, had reasserted themselves with brutal clarity. Tyler watched Jenna leave the party early, unable to stop her without causing more of a scene. He remained by the pool, surrounded by his privileged friends, feeling more alone than ever. The afternoon marked a turning point. Their relationship was no longer just about them. It had become a statement, a challenge to the carefully maintained social order of Beverly Hills. Franklin Canyon Park offered the privacy Tyler and Jenna couldn't find in Beverly Hills. They sat on a worn wooden bench overlooking the lake, far from the judgmental eyes of both their worlds. The morning fog still clung to the water, providing a sense of isolation they desperately needed. "My art professor wants me to submit work for a scholarship," Jenna said, breaking their comfortable silence. "It could mean art school in New York." Tyler's hand tightened around hers. "That's amazing. When would you leave?" "If I get it, next fall." Jenna watched a duck glide across the lake surface. "But I'm scared, Tyler. Not just about getting in, but about leaving. About what happens to us." "I could come with you," Tyler suggested quickly. "Dad wants me to take over the family business, but I never wanted that life. I could study something else, be someone else in New York." Jenna turned to face him. "You can't just abandon your life for me. Your father would never forgive you." "Maybe that's exactly what I need to do." Tyler stood up, pacing in front of the bench. "Everyone has these expectations. Blake keeps texting me about maintaining our social circle. Madison's throwing these passive-aggressive comments about family legacy. I'm suffocating." Back at the Anderson mansion, Charles noticed changes in his son. Tyler skipped the weekly golf game with board members' children. He missed the Crawford charity dinner. His usual friends stopped coming by. Charles found Tyler in the home gym, aggressively attacking a punching bag. He watched his son for a moment, remembering his own rebellious phase. Though his had involved sports cars and wild parties, not crossing social boundaries. "Your mother's worried about you," Charles said, announcing his presence. Tyler caught the bag, steadying it. "I'm fine. Blake's father mentioned you haven't been returning his calls." Blake made his position clear at the pool party. Tyler unwrapped the tape from his hands. "Apparently, I'm damaging the family reputation." Charles sighed. "Son, you have to understand Dash." "No, Dad, you need to understand. I'm not going to pretend to be someone. I'm not just to make your board members comfortable." In the servants' quarters, Rosa folded laundry while Jenna sketched at their small dining table. The scratching of pencil on paper filled their apartment, a sound that had always brought Rosa peace. "Until now. I need to tell you something," Rosa said, setting down a perfectly folded towel. "When I was your age, I fell in love with someone from a different world too." Jenna looked up from her sketchbook. "What happened?" "His name was Miguel. He was studying to be a doctor while I cleaned houses to support my mother. We thought love would be enough." Rosa sat down across from her daughter. "His family convinced him that marrying me would ruin his career. They weren't wrong. Back then, a doctor with a cleaning lady for a wife? No one would have taken him seriously." "That's horrible," Jenna whispered. "Did you fight for him?" "I wanted to, but Miguel made his choice. He married a dentist's daughter, opened a successful practice. Sometimes I still clean houses where his name comes up in conversation." Rosa reached across the table, taking Jenna's hand. "I'm not telling you this to discourage you, but you need to understand what you're fighting against. It's different now, Mama. Times have changed." "Have they?" Rosa challenged gently. "Look at how everyone reacted at the pool party. The whispers haven't stopped. Mrs. Thompson asked me yesterday if I was encouraging this situation." Jenna pulled her hand away. "So you think I should give up? Hide my feelings because society says they're inappropriate?" "No, mi amor. I think you need to be sure this is a fight worth having." Tyler seems different, but when pressure comes from all sides, family, friends, his whole world, will he be strong enough? "Are you?" Back at the park, Tyler and Jenna had moved to sit by the water's edge. Their earlier conversation about New York hung between them, along with all the unspoken fears and hopes it represented. "My mom told me about Miguel," Jenna said quietly. "Her first love who chose his social status over her." Tyler turned to her sharply. "I would never Dash. You can't promise that," Jenna interrupted. "You don't know how hard it will get. Your father's position, your family's reputation, your friends' expectations. It's a lot to give up. What about your art? Your dreams? Aren't those worth fighting for?" "That's different. My art is part of who I am. But loving you?" Jenna picked up a stone, tossing it into the lake. "Loving you could cost us both everything we've worked for." They sat there until the fog lifted, watching ripples spread across the water's surface, each lost in thoughts about choices, consequences, and the price of following your heart. The morning had started with dreams of New York and escape, but reality had crept in with the sunlight, revealing the complexity of their situation in harsh clarity. Charles Anderson found himself in unfamiliar territory, standing at the door of Rosa's apartment in the servants' wing. He'd never visited this part of his own house before, though he'd employed Rosa for 15 years. He knocked, adjusting his casual weekend sweater, deliberately chosen to appear less intimidating. Rosa opened the door, surprise briefly crossing her face before her professional mask slipped into place. "Mr. Anderson, is something wrong with the house?" "No, Rosa. I was hoping we could talk about our children." She hesitated before stepping aside. "Please come in." The apartment was small but immaculate, with careful touches that made it home. Fresh flowers in a simple vase, framed artwork that Charles now recognized as Jenna's earlier pieces, well-worn but carefully maintained furniture. "Would you like some coffee?" Rosa offered, falling back on years of rained hospitality. "Please." Charles sat at the small dining table, noting the contrast between this and his massive dining room. "You've made a lovely home here." Rosa busied herself with the coffee maker. "We've been fortunate. This position has allowed me to give Jenna opportunities one never had." "That's actually what I wanted to discuss." Charles accepted the coffee mug she offered. "Rosa, we've worked together for many years. I've always respected your work ethic, your discretion. But this situation with our children—" "Mr. Anderson," Rosa interrupted, sitting across from him. "I want you to know I've advised Jenna about the complications of this relationship." "Have you?" Charles took a sip of coffee, surprisingly good compared to his usual expensive blend. "And what exactly did you tell her?" "The truth. That love doesn't always conquer social barriers. That people like us serve people like you. We don't join your families." Rosa's voice carried years of accumulated wisdom and pain. Charles set down his mug. "You know, when I first started my company, many doors were closed to me. Wrong schools, wrong connections. I had to fight my way in." "With all due respect, Mr. Anderson, starting with middle-class advantages isn't quite the same as starting with nothing." "No, you're right." Charles surprised them both with his admission. "I've never had to clean houses or worry about keeping my children fed. I've never faced the kind of prejudice your family has." Meanwhile, in Tyler's art studio, a converted guest house he'd rarely used before meeting Jenna, the young couple shared their own moment of vulnerability. Jenna stood before an easel, teaching Tyler basic painting techniques. "You're pressing too hard," she guided, placing her hand over his on the brush. "Let it flow naturally. I'm better at destroying things than creating them." Tyler joked, but there was an edge to his voice. "What do you mean?" "I destroyed my friendship with Blake. My relationship with Dad is strained. The hospital board is probably reconsidering his position because of me." Tyler set down the brush. "Sometimes I wonder if I'm being selfish, pursuing us." Jenna stepped back, creating distance. "If that's how you feel, no." Tyler caught her hand. "That came out wrong. I'm not regretting us. I'm angry at a world that makes me choose between love and loyalty, between happiness and duty." Back in Rosa's apartment, the conversation between Charles and Rosa had shifted to unexpected territory. "Tell me about Jenna's art," Charles requested. "I saw her piece at the gallery, the one about connected communities." Rosa's face softened. She's always seen beauty in unlikely places. When she was small, she would draw pictures of our neighborhood. Not just the rundown buildings, but the people helping each other, the community gardens, the street musicians. And now she's painting Beverly Hills. She paints what she sees, the connections people miss, the humanity behind the wealth. Rosa hesitated before adding, "Like the humanity I've seen in your family, Mr. Anderson, despite our different positions." Charles stood, walking to examine one of Jenna's framed pieces, a simple sketch of hands passing bread across a table. "You know, Rosa, I've spent my life building walls. Around my wealth, my status, my family. I thought I was protecting something valuable. Weren't you? Maybe. But watching Tyler these past weeks, he's showing more backbone standing up for his feelings than I ever did fighting my way into country clubs." In the art studio, Tyler and Jenna had abandoned the painting lesson. They sat on the paint-splattered floor, sharing dreams and fears. "If we do this," Jenna said, "really do this, commit to each other despite everything, we have to be sure. No doubts." Tyler traced her paint-stained fingers. "I'm sure about you. Everything else is just noise. Even if your father disapproves, even if it affects his career, even then." Tyler's voice carried absolute conviction. "I've spent my whole life trying to fit into a world I never really believed in. With you, I finally feel real." As the afternoon light faded, Charles prepared to leave Rosa's apartment. At the door, he paused. "Rosa, I came here hoping to find reasons to end this relationship between our children. Instead, I'm beginning to question why I thought I had that right." "They're young, Mr. Anderson. Young people often believe love conquers all." "Maybe," Charles replied. "It's time we older people remembered what that felt like." The day ended with 4 people in different parts of the same house, each wrestling with questions of love, duty, and change. In the main house, Charles stared at his reflection in his study's window, seeing past his successful facade to the young man who once dreamed of changing the world. In the servants' quarters, Rosa held an old photograph of herself and Miguel, wondering if she'd been right to give up so easily. And in the art studio, Tyler and Jenna continued painting, creating their own world on canvas, refusing to believe it couldn't exist in reality. The Beverly Hills Hospital Foundation Gala represented everything Tyler had grown to question. Gold-embossed invitations arrived at the Anderson mansion, announcing this year's theme: building bridges in healthcare. The irony wasn't lost on him as he stood in Jenna's small studio apartment, holding the cream-colored envelope. "You should come with me," Tyler said, watching Jenna work on a commissioned piece. "Your art's already been featured in local galleries. You belong there as much as anyone." Jenna's brush paused mid-stroke. "A gala full of hospital board members and social elites? I'd stick out like oil paint on silk." "That's exactly why you should come. Show them you're not afraid." "But I am afraid," Jenna admitted, setting down her brush. "I've seen how these people look at me, Tyler, like I'm some sort of social experiment you're conducting." In the main house, Rosa polished silverware for the pre-gala dinner Charles was hosting. Her movements were mechanical, her mind elsewhere. Mrs. Anderson approached, carrying a garment bag. "Rosa, I need your opinion on something." She unzipped the bag, revealing an elegant evening gown. "Do you think this would fit, Jenna?" Rosa's hands stilled on the silver. "Mrs. Anderson? Charles mentioned that Tyler wants to bring her to the gala. If she's going to attend, she should have something appropriate to wear." Mrs. Anderson smoothed the fabric. "It's last season's Vera Wang, but it's barely been worn." "Mrs. Anderson, I appreciate the gesture, but Rosa," Mrs. Anderson interrupted gently. "I've watched your daughter grow up alongside Tyler. She's talented, educated, and carries herself with dignity. The only thing separating her from the other guests is a label sewn into a dress." Later that evening, Rosa brought the dress to Jenna's studio. "Mrs. Anderson wants you to have this for the gala." Jenna stared at the shimmering fabric. "It's beautiful, but Mama, accepting this feels like charity?" Rosa hung the dress on a nearby easel. "Or like recognition? Both? Neither?" Jenna touched the dress lightly. "I don't want to pretend to be something I'm not. Mihija, going to this gala doesn't mean denying who you are. Sometimes, walking through the front door instead of the service entrance is an act of courage." Meanwhile, Charles faced his own challenges at the country club. Richard Crawford cornered him after a golf game. "Heard Tyler's bringing the housekeeper's daughter to the gala," Richard said, carefully watching Charles's reaction. "Bold move, considering the hospital board election is next month." Charles adjusted his golf glove. "My son's date to a charity event hardly seems relevant to hospital administration." "Everything's relevant in our circle, Charles. You know that." Richard's voice lowered. "There's talk of postponing the board vote. Give things time to settle." Charles felt his jaw tighten. "And if things don't settle? Then the board might feel more comfortable with someone who maintains certain social standards." That evening, during family dinner, Charles watched Tyler push food around his plate. "Son, about the gala dash. I'm not uninviting her, Dad. I wasn't going to suggest that." Charles set down his fork. I was going to ask if she needs anything. A car service, perhaps? Professional styling? Tyler looked up, surprised. You're okay with this? No, Charles admitted. I'm uncomfortable, worried about consequences, and completely out of my depth. But I'm trying to understand. In her studio, Jenna tried on the dress, tears threatening as she stared at her reflection. The girl in the mirror looked like she belonged in Beverly Hills, but her hands still carried paint stains, marks of who she really was. She picked up her phone, finger hovering over Tyler's number. One call, and she could back out, avoid the scrutiny, the whispers, the judgment. Instead, she opened her camera and sent him a photo of her latest painting, a woman walking through a door, half in shadow, half in light. Tyler responded immediately. Beautiful. Like the artist. The days leading up to the gala filled with preparations. Rosa arranged for her sister, a professional hairstylist in a downtown salon, to do Jenna's hair. Mrs. Anderson discreetly provided accessories that would complement the dress. Charles had his personal driver assigned to pick up Jenna, a small gesture that spoke volumes about his evolving perspective. The morning of the gala, Tyler found Jenna in her studio, working on a new piece. You don't have to do this, he said, watching her clean her brushes with methodical care. Yes, I do. Jenna set the brushes aside. Not just for us, but for my mom, who spent years serving drinks at events like this. For every talented person who's been told they don't belong. You might hear things tonight. Cruel things. I've heard cruel things all my life. Jenna faced him. But I've also heard beauty in my mother's lullabies, seen worth in communities others overlook, and found love in unexpected places. Those matter more. As evening approached, the Anderson mansion buzzed with activity. In the main house, Tyler adjusted his bow tie, feeling like he was preparing for battle rather than a charity event. In the servants' quarters, Rosa helped Jenna with final touches, her heart pounding with both pride and fear. And in his study, Charles stared at the hospital board nomination letter on his desk, wondering when maintaining social status had become more important than nurturing genuine human connections. The stage was set for a night that would either bridge their worlds or break them apart entirely. The Beverly Hills Hotel's crystal ballroom glittered with chandeliers and social expectations. Tyler stood at the entrance, his heart racing as the venue filled with Beverly Hills elite. At exactly 8 o'clock, his father's car pulled up and Jenna emerged. The Vera Wang dress transformed her artist's frame into something ethereal, but it was her quiet confidence that turned heads. She carried herself with the same careful grace she used while painting, each step deliberate and purposeful. You look amazing, Tyler whispered, taking her arm. I feel like I'm walking into the lion's den, Jenna replied through a practiced smile. Charles watched from the reception line as Tyler guided Jenna toward him. The whispers had already started, a subtle rustle of judgment moving through the crowd like wind through dry leaves. Tyler, Charles nodded, then turned to Jenna. Welcome to the Foundation Gala. His greeting was formal but not unkind, a carefully measured response that the watching crowd would dig. Isek for meaning. Madison Crawford materialized beside them, wearing a dress that cost more than Rose's yearly salary. Jenna, what a surprise! I hardly recognized you without the paint stains. Jenna met Madison's gaze steadily. Art is my passion. I'm never ashamed of its marks on me. How quaint. Madison's smile didn't reach her eyes. Tyler, darling, the old prep school crowd is gathering near the bar. You simply must join us for old time's sake. From her position serving champagne, Rosa watched the scene unfold. She'd taken an extra shift at the gala, unable to stay away while her daughter navigated this treacherous social waters. Now, she observed as Beverly Hills' finest circled Jenna like sharks scenting blood. Your daughter cleans up well, whispered Maria, another server. But these people never forget where we come from. They might surprise you, Rosa replied, though her hands trembled slightly as she arranged champagne flutes. Near the bar, Tyler found himself surrounded by his old friends. Blake Thompson handed him a drink without asking. So you actually brought her, Blake said, his voice low. Bold move, considering your father's board nomination. She's my girlfriend, Blake. This isn't some statement. Everything's a statement in this world, Tyler. You know that. Blake gestured toward where Jenna stood alone, examining a piece of art on the wall. Look at her. She's more interested in the decorations than networking. She doesn't understand our world. Maybe our world needs to change, Tyler countered, setting down his untouched drink. Across the room, Charles found himself cornered by Richard Crawford and several board members. Quite a spectacle, Charles, Richard commented. Though I suppose every father must let his son rebel in his own way. My son's relationship choices are his own, Charles replied diplomatically. Are they? Richard's voice hardened. When they affect hospital board politics, several members have expressed concern about your family's judgment. Meanwhile, Jenna had retreated to a quiet corner, studying a particularly expensive piece of modern art. She sensed someone approach and turned to find Mrs. Anderson. The artist completely missed the point of abstract expressionism, Mrs. Anderson said, surprising Jenna with her knowledge. But it cost enough to fund 3 medical wings, so we display it proudly. The composition is beautiful, Jenna offered carefully, but it lacks soul. Much like these events. Mrs. Anderson smiled slightly. You know, I was considered unsuitable when I first married Charles. Wrong side of Beverly Hills. Now I chair 3 charitable boards. What changed? I stopped trying to fit in and made them adjust to me instead. Mrs. Anderson patted Jenna's arm. The art world could use some soul, dear. Rosa, passing with a champagne tray, caught this exchange. She nearly dropped her tray when Richard Crawford deliberately stepped into her path. Careful there, Rosa, he said loudly enough for nearby guests to hear. We wouldn't want any accidents. Though I suppose your daughter's presence has already created quite a mess. The room seemed to still. Rosa stood frozen, years of practiced subservience warring with maternal instinct. Before she could respond, Tyler appeared. Mr. Crawford, he said clearly, I believe you owe both Rosa and Jenna an apology. Tyler, Charles warned, approaching the growing scene. No, duh. I'm tired of pretending this is okay. Tyler's voice carried across the now silent ballroom. These people serve you, clean your houses, raise your children. But God forbid they aspire to join you. Jenna moved to Tyler's side, taking his hand. The gesture, simple but deliberate, sparked another wave of whispers. Charles stood in the center of the storm, watching his son's defiance, seeing Rosa's dignity, observing Jenna's quiet strength. The moment stretched like glass, about to shatter, and every eye in the ballroom waited to see what Charles Anderson, pillar of Beverly Hills society, would do next. The aftermath of the gala explosion followed the Andersons home. Tyler stormed into his father's study, still in his tuxedo, his bow tie hanging loose around his neck. Charles followed, closing the heavy oak door behind them. What were you thinking? Charles demanded, his carefully maintained composure finally cracking. That was not the time or place for a social justice speech. When is the right time, Dad? When the board officially rejects you. When Blake's father pulls his investment from our company. When do we stop pretending this is about anything except prejudice? This isn't that simple, Tyler. Charles slammed his hand on his desk. Do you think I built this life, provided for this family, just to watch you throw it away on some romantic notion? Some romantic notion? Tyler's laugh was bitter. You mean like love? Understanding? Basic human dignity. Outside the study, Jenna stood frozen in the hallway. She'd followed Tyler home, still wearing the borrowed designer dress, now feeling like a costume rather than clothing. Through the door, she could hear every word of their argument. You're 23 years old, Charles continued. You think you understand how the world works? Richard Crawford doesn't just sit on the hospital board. He influences half the business decisions in Beverly Hills. His daughter Madison was supposed to be your perfect match, not the housekeeper's daughter. Her name is Jenna. Tyler's voice rose. She's talented, intelligent, and worth 10 Madisons. But you can't see past her mother's uniform. This isn't about Rose's uniform. This is about reality. What's your plan, Tyler? Move into the servants' quarters? Give up your trust fund? Become a struggling artist's husband while your peers run companies? Maybe I will. Maybe I'm tired of this whole artificial world where we judge people by their bank accounts instead of their character. In the kitchen, Rosa was removing her server's uniform when she heard footsteps. Jenna burst in, tears streaming down her face. Mihija, what happened? I can't do this anymore, Mama. Jenna's voice shook. I can't be the reason their family falls apart. The reason Mr. Anderson loses everything he's worked for. Jenna, listen to me, Dash. No, you were right all along. Jenna struggled with the zipper of the borrowed dress. This isn't a fairy tale. Love doesn't conquer all. Sometimes it just destroys everything in its path. Back in the study, the argument reached its crescendo. I had such hopes for you, Charles said, his voice heavy with disappointment. The company, the board position, continuing our family's legacy. Your legacy, Dad. Not mine. I never wanted any of it. Then what do you want? I want to be free to love who I love. Tyler's voice cracked. I want to live in a world where talent matters more than inheritance, where character counts more than social class. I want to be proud of who I am, not what I own. Charles sank into his leather chair, suddenly looking older. You make it sound so simple. It is simple. We're the ones who make it complicated. A soft knock interrupted them. Mrs. Anderson entered, her face grave. Tyler, honey, Rosa just called up to the house. Jenna's gone. What do you mean, gone? Tyler's anger transformed into panic. She left a note. Rosa's quite upset. Mrs. Anderson hesitated. She said she won't be the reason our family falls apart. Tyler ran from the study, taking the stairs to the servants' quarters two at a time. He found Rosa sitting at her small dining table, a piece of paper in her hands. Where did she go? Rosa looked up, her eyes red. She took a taxi. She said sometimes love means knowing when to walk away. Tyler grabbed the note, reading Jenna's hurried handwriting. Tyler, I heard your I with your father. You're willing to give up everything for me, but I can't let you do that. Your father's right, we live in different worlds. I was foolish to think we could bridge them. I'm going to stay with my aunt for a while. Please don't try to find me. You deserve the life you were born into, and I deserve to find my own path without destroying your family in the process. Thank you for showing me that love exists beyond barriers, even if those barriers prove too strong to break. Jenna, in his study, Charles stood at the window, watching his son race out to his car, presumably to search for Jenna. Mrs. Anderson approached quietly. You know, Charles, she said softly, sometimes the legacy we think we're protecting isn't worth the cost. Outside, Tyler sat in his parked car, clutching Jenna's note, tears falling freely. The night air carried the scent of roses from the garden where he'd first noticed Jenna painting. Everything felt wrong, twisted, broken. He'd stood up for their love, only to have it slip through his fingers like water. And somewhere in the city, in a taxi heading toward an uncertain future, Jenna Martinez wiped away her own tears, still wearing the borrowed dress that had made her feel, for one brief evening, like she belonged in Tyler's world. 3 days passed like a fog over Beverly Hills. Tyler's Range Rover sat unused in the driveway. He checked every art gallery, every park, every place Jenna might have gone until exhaustion forced him home. Now he lay in his room, surrounded by Jenna's sketches, her absence a physical ache. His phone buzzed constantly with messages from Blake and Madison, their words of comfort reading like victory speeches. It's for the best, man. She did the right thing. Now everything can go back to normal. But normal had lost all meaning. The mansion felt hollow, every corner holding memories of stolen glances and secret smiles. In the servants' quarters, Rosa moved through her duties mechanically. She'd received one brief text from Jenna, safe with Tia Carmen. Need time. Love you, Mama. The knowledge that her daughter was safe brought little comfort. She recognized the pain of sacrifice in Jenna's choice. Charles noticed the changes in his household. The usual efficiency remained, but the warmth had vanished. He caught Rosa staring at Jenna's artwork still hanging in the hallway, her fingers touching the frame briefly before continuing her work. Have you heard from her? Charles asked one morning, breaking their usual professional distance. She's with my sister, Rosa answered, her voice carefully neutral. She's looking into art programs there. In New York. Yes, sir. Rosa adjusted a vase of flowers that didn't need adjusting. Carmen knows people at several galleries. They're interested in Jenna's work. The information hit Tyler hard when his mother shared it at dinner. He pushed away from the table, appetite gone. She's really leaving? Just like that, Tyler, his mother began, but he was already heading to his car. The drive to Jenna's studio felt eternal. He hadn't been there since she left, afraid of what he'd find. The space looked exactly as she'd left it. Paintbrushes still soaking in water, canvases half finished, her coffee mug still on the workbench. The largest canvas faced the wall. Tyler turned it around and felt his breath catch. It was their story. The Beverly Hills mansion on one side, the servants' quarters on the other, connected by a bridge made of intertwined hands. In the center, two figures reached for each other across the divide. She must have been working on it secretly, planning to show him when it was finished. Now it would remain forever incomplete. Back in her small New York apartment, Jenna sat surrounded by blank canvases, unable to pick up a brush. Her Aunt Carmen watched with concern. "You're punishing yourself," Carmen observed, setting down a cup of tea. "Art was your voice long before it became your escape." "I can't paint right now," Jenna whispered. "Everything I try turns into him." Carmen sat beside her niece. "When your mother fell in love with Miguel, she stopped singing. Did you know that? She used to sing while she worked, beautiful old Mexican songs. After Miguel chose his career over her, the music died. Is that supposed to make me feel better? No, mi amor. It's supposed to make you think. Your mother lost her song. Are you going to lose your art?" Meanwhile, Rosa found Tyler in Jenna's studio late that night. He sat on the paint-splattered floor, staring at the unfinished painting. "She was wrong," he said without looking up. Walking away didn't fix anything. Rosa settled beside him, her uniform skirt carefully arranged. "She thought she was protecting you. From what? Happiness? Love? A chance at something real? From losing your family, your position, your future." Tyler turned to her, eyes red. "But that's exactly what's happening anyway. I'm losing everything that matters." In the main house, Charles stood in his study, looking at a framed photo of Tyler's graduation. His son's smile looked genuine then, untouched by the weight of societal expectations. Mrs. Anderson entered quietly. Blake's mother called. "Apparently, the hospital board is relieved by recent developments." "Are they?" Charles's voice was bitter. "Relieved that love lost to prejudice? That my son hasn't smiled in days? That a talented young artist fled across the country? What are you going to do about it?" Charles picked up the hospital board nomination letter. "I've spent my life playing by their rules, making the right connections, joining the right clubs, maintaining the right image. And I've never been more ashamed of myself." In her New York apartment, Jenna finally picked up a brush. The canvas before her remained blank, but her hand moved with purpose. If she couldn't paint her love, she would paint her pain, the cost of walking away, the price of protection, the weight of sacrifice. The first stroke of red cut across the white canvas like a wound. Back in the studio, Tyler stood up suddenly. "I need your help, Rosa." "With what?" "Finding her. Bringing her home." Rosa shook her head. "Tyler, she made her choice. No, society made it for her. Just like they made it for you and Miguel." Tyler's voice grew stronger. "But we're not them. This isn't 15 years ago. And I'm not letting go without a fight." As midnight approached, for people lay awake in different cities. Jenna in New York, surrounded by the beginnings of a new painting series titled The Cost of Goodbye. Tyler in Beverly Hills, formulating a plan to win back what he'd lost. Charles in his study, questioning a lifetime of adherence to social rules. And Rosa in her quarters, remembering the sound of her own voice, singing love songs in her youth. The canvas in Jenna's studio remained unfinished, the bridge between worlds incomplete, a testament to love interrupted, but perhaps not ended. Charles Anderson sat alone in his study at 3 in the morning, surrounded by photographs spanning decades. Images of society galas, board meetings, and charity events covered his desk, a carefully curated life of privilege and power. But his eyes kept returning to a single photo, Tyler at age 7, painting alongside a young Jenna during a rare moment when the children's worlds had intersected naturally before society's rules had built their walls. The sound of the front door opening broke his concentration. Tyler stumbled in, exhausted from another night of searching galleries and art supply stores. hoping to catch a glimpse of Jenna. "Dad!" Tyler paused in the doorway, surprised to find his father awake. "What are you doing?" Charles held up the childhood photo. "Do you remember this day?" Tyler moved closer, recognition softening his features. Jenna had just moved into the servants' quarters with Rosa. We spent the whole afternoon painting with her watercolors. You were both covered in paint by dinner time. Charles set the photo down carefully. "When did we start telling our children who they could love?" "Around the same time we started believing our bank accounts defined our worth," Tyler replied, the bitterness in his voice tempered by exhaustion. In her bedroom, Mrs. Anderson listened to the quiet conversation drifting up from the study. She picked up her phone, hesitating only briefly before dialing a number. "Carmen? It's Elizabeth Anderson." "Yes, I know it's late in New York. We need to talk about Jenna." Meanwhile, Charles turned to face his son fully. "I spoke with Richard Crawford today. He wanted to assure me that the board position was still mine if I could guarantee there wouldn't be any more incidents." Tyler's jaw tightened. And I told him to shove his board position up his privileged ass." The unexpected profanity from his usually proper father startled a laugh from Tyler. "You didn't." "I did." Charles ran a hand through his silver hair. "I've spent 30 years trying to prove I belong in their world. Today I realized I'm not sure it's a world worth belonging to." Upstairs, Mrs. Anderson's conversation with Carmen continued in hushed tones. "No, don't tell her we spoke. Just, is she painting? Good. Her work deserves to be seen, Carmen. More than that, it needs to be seen." In New York, Jenna worked through the night in her aunt's spare room, transformed into a makeshift studio. Her new series took shape, powerful, raw paintings that captured the pain of separation and the cost of social division. Carmen watched from the doorway, her phone call with Elizabeth Anderson still fresh in her mind. "The Bowery Gallery called again," Carmen mentioned casually. "They want to feature your new series." Jenna's brush paused. "I'm not ready. Art isn't about being ready, Sabrina. It's about being honest." Back in Beverly Hills, Charles pulled a folder from his desk drawer. "I made some calls today, to galleries in New York, to art school admissions offices, to people who owe me favors." "Dad, you can't fix this with money or connections." "No," Charles agreed, "but I can use those things to create opportunities. The rest will be up to you and Jenna." Tyler picked up the childhood photo. "Why now? What changed?" Charles was quiet for a long moment. "I saw myself in Richard Crawford today, so convinced of our own importance that we'd sacrifice our children's happiness to maintain it. I saw your mother and Rosa, strong women who adapted to worlds that never fully accepted them. And I saw you and Jenna in this photo before we taught you to see differences instead of connections." Mrs. Anderson appeared in the doorway. "I just spoke with Carmen. The Bowery Gallery is featuring Jenna's new series next week. They're calling it Bridges Burned and Built." Tyler stood quickly. "I need to go to New York." "We'll all go," Charles declared, surprising everyone, including himself. "It's time this family stopped hiding behind social conventions and started acting like a family." Rosa, who had been passing by with fresh towels, stopped at the study door. Charles met her eyes. "Rosa, would you like to see your daughter's gallery opening?" The towels trembled slightly in her hands. "Sir, not as our housekeeper, as Jenna's mother. As part of this," Charles gestured to encompass them all, "whatever this is becoming." In New York, Jenna added the final brushstroke to her centerpiece, a massive canvas depicting a grand ballroom. But instead of the usual society figures, the dancers were painted as transparent forms, their true selves visible through their designer clothes. Workers, artists, dreamers, all moving to the same rhythm. Carmen watched her niece step back from the painting. "You're still in love with him." "Love I? Isn't always enough," Jenna replied, but her voice lacked conviction. "No," Carmen agreed, thinking of Elizabeth Anderson's phone call, of plans being set in motion. Sometimes it needs a little help from unexpected places. Dawn broke over Beverly Hills as the Anderson household stirred with unusual activity. Charles made calls to his pilot about the private jet. Mrs. Anderson coordinated with Carmen about accommodations. Rosa packed a suitcase for the first time in 15 years, her uniform left hanging in the closet. And Tyler sat in Jenna's studio, looking at their unfinished painting of the bridge between worlds. He picked up a brush, dipping it in paint. He wasn't an artist, but he could add his own truth to their story. Carefully, steadily, he began to extend the bridge. The Bowery Gallery hummed with anticipation on opening night. New York's art scene elite mingled with curious locals, all drawn by the buzz surrounding the mysterious new artist whose work captured the clash between social classes with raw honesty. Jenna stood in a back room, smoothing down her simple black dress, her own this time, not borrowed. 5 minutes until doors open, Carmen announced, peeking in. Are you ready? No, Jenna admitted. But I guess art isn't about being ready, right? What Jenna didn't know was that a private jet had landed at JFK 2 hours earlier. The Anderson family, including Rosa, had checked into the Four Seasons. Now they waited in a sleek black SUV outside the gallery. Charles Anderson, unusually nervous in the front seat. Remember, Mrs. Anderson said, touching Tyler's arm, she might not want to see us. We have to respect that. Tyler clutched a rolled canvas in his hands, their unfinished bridge painting, now complete with his amateur but heartfelt additions. I just need her to see this, to understand. Inside the gallery, the doors opened. Art critics circled Jenna's paintings like hawks, dissecting her technique, her message, her bold color choices. The centerpiece, the ballroom with transparent dancers, drew particular attention. The artist is clearly commenting on the artifice of high society, one critic pronounced. See how the true selves shine through the fancy dress? No, a familiar voice corrected. She's showing that we're all the same underneath, that the barriers we create are artificial. Jenna froze. Charles Anderson stood before her painting, Rosa and Mrs. Anderson flanking him like guards. He'd shed his usual business suit for a simple black jacket, looking more human than she'd ever seen him. Mr. Anderson? Jenna's voice shook. What are you doing here? Supporting a talented artist, he replied, then softened his tone. And trying to right some wrongs. Before Jenna could respond, a commotion near the entrance drew everyone's attention. Tyler had arrived, still carrying the rolled canvas. Their eyes met across the gallery, and the world seemed to stop. Ladies and gentlemen, Carmen announced, right on cue, the artist will now unveil a special piece, a collaboration that inspired this entire series. Tyler approached, unrolling the canvas. There was their bridge painting, but now the incomplete bridge had been finished, not with technical skill, but with pure emotion. Tyler had painted himself on one side, Jenna on the other, and the bridge between them glowed with hundreds of tiny handprints in different colors. I added everyone who helped build our bridge, Tyler explained softly. Rose's hands in green, for all the time she secretly supported us. Mom's in blue, for the dress she gave you. Dad's in red, because he finally learned to see with his heart instead of his wallet. And all the others who work in our house, in gold, because they're worth more than any society status. Tears streamed down Jenna's face. You finished it. No, Tyler corrected, taking her paint-stained hands in his. We did. All of us. Charles stepped forward, addressing the crowd, but looking at Jenna. When I was young, someone told me success meant fitting into a certain world. Today, my son helped me understand that real success is having the courage to create your own. Rosa moved to her daughter's side, no longer in a uniform, but in an elegant dress that matched her dignity. Mihija, sometimes love needs time to teach others how to see. The gallery buzzed with whispers as people recognized Charles Anderson, realizing the social implications of what was unfolding. But for once, Charles didn't care about whispers. I've made some calls, he said, addressing Jenna directly. The Modern Art Museum wants to feature your series. But more importantly, I want to fund a new artist residency program, one that specifically supports talented artists from working-class backgrounds. And I want you to help run it. Jenna looked stunned. But your position, your reputation, are worth nothing compared to the joy I see in my son's eyes when he's with you. Charles Similet. Besides, I've discovered I prefer building bridges to maintaining walls. Mrs. Anderson stepped forward with Carmen, revealing the final surprise. We've been working with several galleries. They want to create a traveling exhibition, breaking barriers through art. Your work would be the centerpiece, but you'd help select other artists from diverse backgrounds. Tyler still held Jenna's hands. I don't care if we live in Beverly Hills or New York or a tiny studio somewhere. I just want to build something real with you. The choice is yours, Rosa added. But know that whatever you choose, you won't have to choose between worlds anymore. Jenna looked around the gallery, at her paintings that told their story, at the unlikely group of people who had crossed social barriers to stand with her, at the man who loved her enough to finish their bridge. She squeezed Tyler's hands. I think, she said slowly, it's time to paint a new picture. Together. The gallery erupted in applause, though most didn't fully understand the significance of what they'd witnessed. Art critics would later write about the night's performance piece about class barriers, missing the point that it wasn't a performance at all. That night, as the Anderson family, now unofficially expanded, celebrated at Carmen's modest apartment, Charles raised a toast. To bridges built, barriers broken, and the courage to love without limits. Tyler and Jenna stood on Carmen's small balcony later, looking at the New York skyline. The paint-stained canvas that had started their story leaned against the wall behind them. Your father really changed, Jenna marveled. We all did, Tyler replied. Maybe that's what love is supposed to do, not just connect people, but transform them. Below, Rosa's voice drifted up. She was singing an old Mexican love song for the first time in decades. Charles Anderson, titan of Beverly Hills society, sat in a cramped kitchen learning to make tamales from Carmen. Mrs. Anderson and the gallery owner discussed plans for the traveling exhibition. Two worlds had collided and, instead of breaking, had created something entirely new. Something worth painting,